Hi everyone, Jessica here and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I thought we'd take a look at a Altenew stamp set. This is called Delicate Clusters and this is a layering stamp set. So this is the stamp set, and as you can see, lots of stamps included, plus a couple of sentiments there as well. I've also got two Altenew ink pad sets. So the first we've got is Green Meadows, and we'll be using this for the layering of the stems and the leaves in this stamp set. We've also got Lapis Lazuli, I hope I've said that right, and we're going to use these for our flowers. So first of all, I want to show you an example of what you can create with this stamp set. So within this Delicate Clusters set, you've got two sort of different styles of the same flower. So you can see them both here. So we've used the ink pads that we're going to be using in today's video to create these as well. So you can really see how it's going to look. I've also been experimenting recently with a second generation stamping, and I've done that with this image here. As you can see, obviously it is quite faded, which is the general idea. So we'll definitely be giving this a go with different stamp sets and different inks to see what sort of results that you can get. But let's concentrate on this Altenew stamp set today. So as you can see, you've got 3 sentiment stamps in there as well. You've got You're So Special and Just Be You. I really like these sentiments. I think they're really great for your stash, and I really love the font that they've come in and the fact that you've got a couple of different style fonts in there as well. I think that's really nice. So let me show you another example of how I've used this stamp set. So with this one, I've created a little bit of a ink wash just onto some watercolour card. And I've just used the stamp set in the normal way, layering up the colours with the different shades of the ink pads, and I'm really surprised at just how vivid that colour has stayed. I thought maybe it would be a little bit washed out against that green background, but it's actually still worked really well. So again, this is something that I'll definitely be trying in the future, different colours and sort of different combinations to see what the results are like. Okay, so let's take a look at the actual stamp itself. So this set comes with 2 sort of variations on the style of the same flower, and then each design has got 7 stamps that goes with it. So for the stems and the leaves, you have got 3 stamps, and then for the actual flower clusters themselves, they each have 4 stamps. So you can use 3 colours for the sort of green section, so for the stems and the leaves. And then you can obviously use 4 different colours for the actual cluster flowers. So a lot of the Altenew stamp sets come with these little booklets. So on the back, it's going to give you a guide of how to layer these stamps up. So you've got sort of the first stamp plus the second stamp and so on equals that sort of final design. So they've broken it down between the clusters and the stems and the leaves. And also at the bottom, they've included the ink pads that they've used to create those exact images. And I think this is really great if you're perhaps a beginner to this and you're not 100% sure where to start. There's a couple of ideas there of colours to use and sort of what it will look like. So on the inside, these are really clever with what they've done. They've actually given you 4 card toppers, so you could cut these out and you create cards with these straight away. And they're sort of different designs, but again, they're using their products and they're actually using this particular product to give you a few design ideas. Then here in the middle, they've got how to use them, and then they've got a care and storage section as well. So make sure that you sort of look after your stamps. They've also, again, given you some cluster ideas, just some inspiration on how to use their products. And I think this is a fantastic thing to do because it doesn't leave you kind of stranded after you've purchased their products. So the other thing they've included is with these sort of card toppers that they've included in this little booklet, they've actually given you a breakdown of the stamps sets they've used and also the colours they've used. So again, perhaps if you want to recreate that card, they've given you all the information that you need to be able to do that perfectly. So this is, like I said, a really great place to start if you are a beginner or you are new to Altenew layering stamps. And it means you can work on the technique of using these layering stamps rather than having to worry about the actual design of it. So let's take a quick look at the ink pads themselves. So this is the first time I've purchased Altenew ink pads, and the reason that I purchased them along with this stamp set was because I wanted to sort of see how to use the products together, but also because I wanted to have those 4 different shades from the same colour family. So the way they've designed these stamps is each one is just a bit darker than the last, and I sort of wasn't sure that I had enough colours in the ink pads I already got to be able to get the sort of desired look. If I'm going to be completely honest, my knowledge of different kinds of inks isn't brilliant. Just looking at the packaging, obviously they are dye-based inks. They are fast drying, water-based. They're going to give you a smooth coverage and a crisp impression every single time. So we will certainly test that out in today's video. So let's jump into how we are going to use this Altenew Delicate Clusters stamp set and their crisp dye ink pads. So what I'm going to be using is my stamping platform. So because you need to get the sort of next image in line with the previous image, I wouldn't necessarily trust myself to do it perfectly like I would want it to be. So this is the reason why I'm using my stamping platform. As you guys know, I always do use it. But I think this is definitely the way to go. Unless you're super confident with an acrylic block, which I am not, I would strongly recommend investing in a stamping platform of some description. So I'm just using a 300 GSM white cardstock here. This is the Ink Me Up by Hunky Dory, and I find this cardstock really, really good for inking, especially if we're going to be doing sort of lots of layers of the ink. So all of our stamps are labelled. So you've got A and B. So you've got A1, which we're starting with here, and it goes A1, A2, A3, etc. So like I said, there's 7 stamps per set. So I'm just bringing my paper up because obviously the stamp is going to hang over the edge, so I need that to come off the page. You can sort of alter the shape if you want, so you can bend it, and that's really good for using the stamping platform because then you'll be able to sort of line everything up sort of as you want it to be. So let's go ahead and stamp our first layer down. So again, this is going to be the base layer for the stem and then for those leaves that you'll be able to see amongst the clusters. So for the stem and the leaves, there are only 3 stamps, but obviously you've got 4 stamps in this set. So what I'm going to do is just miss out the lighter shade, and I'm going to go from the second shade all the way up. So we're going to start with Sweet Leaf. So the pads are sort of nice and squishy, so I'm just sort of doing light taps all along the stamp just to get a good coverage on it. I probably will end up stamping this again, and I do sort of stamp it a couple of times just to get that sort of a solid sort of smooth look that they kind of boast about. So most of the time I do tend to stamp my images a couple of times because I want that solid sort of crisp image from my stamping. With these, you might not need to re-stamp it because you're building up that colour. You kind of don't want that layer to become too heavy with ink because you want to be able to have a clear definition between your previous layer and your next layer. So I've just used a paper towel to clean that excess ink off. However, if you are looking at second generation stamping, then obviously just get yourself a clean piece of paper, load that into your stamping platform, and you can create an image just like that one from these stamps. So we've done our first layer for our stem and the leaves. So now we can go on to stamp number 2. So this is labelled A2. And all we're going to do is just line up this stamp with what we've already stamped down. So it is just going to go over what we've stamped with that darker colour, and that will give you the shadow and then the lighter bits from the previous stamp. The stamps are quite easy to line up, but obviously you want to just make sure that you line them up perfectly. So as you go through the layers of the stamps, you want to just make sure that you're inking up the whole of the stamp. So for example, you can see that really tiny kind of speck at the top. You want to make sure you don't miss any of these details out. So do take care to make sure that you are inking up the whole of your stamp. So this has now added some really nice shadows onto our leaves. So the first stamp includes a stamp for the stem, but that is the only sort of layer for that section. The other two stamps for this section are just to build up the leaf design. So now we can move on to number 3. So the colours that we've used is Sweet Leaf, Just Green and Hunter Green. So Hunter Green is our darkest shade of green. And then again, this will just add some more of those shadows onto your design, and it will make it look as realistic as possible. So I stamped that last stamp a few times just to get that really sort of nice dark colour in there. So now we can go ahead and start on the sort of cluster flowers of this stamp. So it's really easy to line up this sort of base flower stamp with the leaf of what we've already got down. Obviously you can use the packaging if you're not 100% sure, but as you can see, that very bottom little sort of bud is going to sit with that bit of sort of leaf that's coming out. So you'll be able to line that up. What you want to do, so you don't get any sort of white gaps, if you want to overlap this very slightly with the colour that's already down, because that means then it's going to stamp one on top of the other, which looks fine, you won't notice it, but it means then you won't have that sort of white gap between it. So now we can get started with the stamping. So again, we're starting with the lightest shade from this blue set. And as you can see that already, it sort of looks perfectly in there. And then through those little gaps, you can see some of the other sort of leaves from our previous stamping. And it all just comes together really beautifully. So again, just stamping this a couple of times, just because I want that base colour to be really nice and sharp. So already just leaving it like that, you can see how this is going to begin to come together, and I still think it just looks really, really lovely. So now we've done the first stamp, we can move on to the second of this cluster flowers. So this is then line up perfectly with what we've already stamped. So again, this is just adding that shadow detail just to give these flowers that really fantastic definition. And as you can see here, super easy to line it up because you're just stamping over what you've already stamped. So I'm just going to speed it up a little bit here because I don't want to just keep repeating what I've already said. But these flowers can come together incredibly quickly, and as you can see here, it's so easy to do, and you can create the most amazing images. The one thing I do particularly like about the Altenew stamp sets in general is that your flowers don't have any outlines. So this is just pure colour that you are layering on top of each other to give it that depth and that detail. You're not relying on what sometimes can be quite a thick, heavy black line. I think it makes it look more artistic and makes it a little bit more realistic looking. And I think Altenew really have created really fantastic stamp sets through this layering system. So the other thing I'd just like to point out here is when we were looking at the ink pads themselves, obviously the packaging said that they were quick drying. So that is super important when you're doing this layering technique, because you don't want to be adding sort of wet colour onto wet colour that's already on your page. You want it to dry quickly to be able to build up that colour. And it's done that really well here because it's allowed that colour to build on top of each other and just create these really beautiful flowers. So we're on to our last layer now, and so this darkest blue is going to just add that sort of centre detail onto these flowers. So like I said previously, it's really important to make sure you ink up the whole of your stamp. As you can see on this particular stamp, there isn't much to stamp, but obviously it is super important that you get all of those details in there to finish off this flower beautifully. So here's our finished stamped image, and I think it looks absolutely beautiful. I think the way they've designed it is just absolutely perfect. The colours work really well together. I really love these blue shades, and I just think they've made a really fantastic image. So what I've actually done next is stamped the other design from this delicate cluster stamp set just over the stem of the first flower, and I just think again it looks absolutely beautiful. And you can begin to see how you can use these stamps together to create really beautiful clusters of flowers, different patterns. I just think they'll make the most beautiful craft projects. So let's just go ahead and finish this off, and then we can turn it into a card. So we're just going to pop one of these sentiments onto the card. So we're going to use Just Be You, and I think this is a really beautiful sentiment that will work for most cards. So I'm just sort of playing around with the design of it, but I am just going to kind of put it sort of roughly in the middle to the side. So what I didn't want to do is just add sort of solid black colour to this card. So what I decided to do was, using these ink pads, is do a bit of a gradient effect. And I think this comes out really, really well. So I'm just using the lightest colour just for the very end of the sentiment. So you can sort of graduate this in whichever way you want to, but I've chosen to just go from one side to the other of the sentiment. So again, starting sort of with most of the U with the lighter colour, and then as you sort of work into the sentiment, then we can use the darker colours. I really love it when an idea just sort of pops into your head and you do it, and then it looks absolutely amazing and you wonder why you've never done this in the past. Well, this is one of those moments that I'm having with this gradient sentiment. So I know I've thought about doing it before, where you sort of, with a die cut sentiment maybe, and you sort of ink the paper, or sort of stencil onto the paper or emboss the paper before you use the die cut. But yeah, never really thought about doing a gradient with sort of the stamps. But now I've got these Altenew sets which have that gradient within that pack, it means then that I can do this really, really easily. And I think it just looks absolutely brilliant. I think it looks so much better than if I was just to have stamped that in solid black. Yeah, I think it just kind of fits in really nicely with the rest of the design. So these stamps worked really well with the Altenew ink pads, but I wanted to test them out and see how well they worked with other ink pads that I already had. So I'm going to try them out with my Prism World of Colour ink pads, and these are also dye ink pads, so I'm expecting them to sort of work in roughly the same way. So I've stuck with the same colour, so obviously we've got the green and we've got the blues. So we've got Evergreen, Rainforest Green, Olive Green, then we've got French Navy, Blue Lagoon, and Arctic Mist. So I'm going to use the second cluster design from this stamp set. So these are the bee stamps. Now, what I'm interested to see here is for the actual flower clusters. Now, I've only got 3 blue ink pads from this range, and there's 4 stamps. So what I want to see is if I can take these 3 stamps and actually get 4 layers out of them. So I'm going to double stamp one of them twice. So this does turn into a little bit of an experiment, but I do think it was worth doing just to sort of see the differences, and I don't want to reveal too much, so you've got to keep watching. So what we're going to do is use the first stamp layer. We're going to use the Arctic Mist, so this is the lightest colour. So you can see it takes a few layers just to get that sort of base colour up to where you can actually see it. But again, stamped really well with these dye-based inks. Then we're going to move on to our Blue Lagoon. So now we've done our second layer, I'm actually going to stamp our third layer in that same Blue Lagoon colour. And we're going to see, I'm hoping, is that if we can stamp it a couple of times, it will show up in a darker shade. So here we go, we're going to stamp it a couple of times and see if we can build that colour up. And already after a couple of stamps, you can begin to see that it is actually layering up and getting darker the more we've done it. So I'm actually incredibly impressed that we've managed to create the same layered image by only using 3 ink pads. So if we bring back our previous image that we stamped with the Altenew ink pads that had 4 different shades of blue, you can see we've created just as fabulous image by only using 3 ink pads. So again, I'm really, really surprised. It's not something that I've done before, but I'm incredibly surprised how well that's actually worked. So I actually decided to take that one step further. Now, because we're only interested in the actual flower clusters, I'm only going to stamp the actual clusters here. I'm not going to bother with the stem or the leaves. So I'm going to go back to the first layering stamp for the flower clusters. And what I'm going to do here is see if we can create that whole image again, just using one ink pad. So we're just going to use that blue lagoon colour because that seemed to have worked brilliantly at being able to build that colour up. So we're going to see if this is going to create just as great of an image using one ink pad as it did only using 3 ink pads and using 4 ink pads. I really love this blue lagoon colour. It is one of my favourites, but it seems to be working particularly well with this particular stamp set. It is just building up that colour really, really brilliantly. And it is actually making me wonder whether you need to buy these other stamp sets that have got the colour gradients to still be able to achieve the look that they are designed to achieve. Because I'm able to do this with just one ink pad that I already had in my stash and get just as good of an image as what I have using 4 different ink pads. Now, I probably still would buy a couple more of the Altenew pads just to get that different range of colours. Obviously, I'm only testing this with the blue colour. I don't know how this would work with other shades, but yeah, it does kind of beg the question, perhaps if you're new to this and you just want to try it out, maybe you've only got a couple of ink pads in your craft stash. Actually, you don't really need much more than that to begin with. Just buy a stamp set and see how you get on with it. So you can see here just the image a little bit closer up, and if I'm honest, it doesn't look that different from where we used the 3 ink pads. Obviously it's a different shade of blue to the Altenew ink pads that we've got, but it's still just as good of an image. So really that speaks volumes about the stamp set itself and actually what kind of inks you need and how many inks you need. So you can see here that I tried this again with a couple of other ink pads just because I wanted to see how it differed in its results. So I tried this with a Distress Oxide ink, and that was with the Salty Ocean, and you can see a little bit of sort of difference in the colour layers, but really not a lot. And the same with the Distress ink, so that was the Peacock Feathers colour. Again, you can only just about see some differences. So you wouldn't use ink pads like these to create this kind of image. So looking at that dye-based ink, I'm so impressed at how well that's come out just using one ink pad. It really doesn't look that different from the image to the left of that where we've used 3 different images. Again, just really, really impressed, and I do want to try this with other colours to see if the results are just as good. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope you found it a little bit inspiring. Here is the finished card from the image that we stamped at the beginning. So again, that gradient sentiment I think looks really, really good, and I think I'd definitely be doing that again. So there's a lot of firsts in this video for me. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you have, then please give it a thumbs up. Please leave a comment below, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thanks very much for watching, and happy crafting!